Hello and welcome once more to another episode of Tiny Table Talks, the podcast about games on a board, games on a screen, and all the other places that people play their games. Fighting it out for the non-existent title of Best Tiny Table Presenter this week are... in the red corner, from the mean streets of Surrey, it's the featherweight frightener, it's Claire! In the blue corner, all the way from a different part of Surrey, the one they call the cheapskate chariot. He's mean, he's lean, he's got a soda stream machine. It's Rob! In the other corner, the non-Surrey challenger, the one they call the deliberator. The guys think he's too slow to play with, but the ladies, they don't mind. He's in form, he's got an artificial lawn. It's Soylent! And bringing you all the action tonight, your host who's forgotten the most, the man without a plan, it's Sam! So for our discussion topic this week, we've opted for a slight change of format, taking a lead from the very popular game of Cards Against Humanity and various other party games for that matter. Claire has prepared a question for us to each champion a game in response to. The one with the most compelling or most humorous case will be crowned the winner. Over time, we might just log all the winners and the losers so we can work out who is the overall winner at the end of a series. And of course, who is the overall loser?
It will be Rob.
It will be Rob. You're right, it will be Rob. So then, Claire, what's our topic for this week?
Your topic for this week is, I want you to nominate the game that's made you laugh the most. And I'm going to start with you, Simon.
So the game that I've by far had the most fun and laughed whilst playing is a game called Rapido. I don't know if anyone else on the podcast has played it.
I've heard of it, but I've never played it.
For those that haven't heard of it or have never played it, Rapido is basically Pictionary, but instead of drawing, you get a block of Play-Doh and a variety of kind of sculpting tools, and you have to kind of sculpt and model the clue that people are trying to guess.
Oh, that sounds great!
It is brilliant, mainly because despite the best efforts of the designers to make it a family-friendly game, every game I've ever played, just everything looks very phallic. It could be the clue could be completely innocent, but somehow someone will design something out of that Play-Doh that is extremely phallic. So the kind of nice twist on this is that oftentimes it will be like a race against time for each team to guess what their designer is making, and sometimes they'll be making the same thing as the competing team, and sometimes they'll be making something different. So every now and then you could look at the other person who might be like sculpting this amazing piece of art, and you're like, I know exactly what that is, but I don't want to say it because A, it might not be what I'm trying to guess, and B, I don't want to help the other team, which I always find to be quite entertaining. And whoever loses on each round actually loses like a set amount of the dough. So as you get worse, you get less Play-Doh to play with, which means that you have to be kind of a bit more inventive with how you do your sculpting. So it's very entertaining. The reason that it makes me laugh the most is just when we play it, we tend to pair people up in like odd pairs. So it's not as fun if you're playing with your significant other, because of course you kind of know how each other think and how each other, work and react and how you would problem solve. And so you become quite a formidable team. It's more interesting to take like, if you've got like two couples playing, you get like the boyfriends and the girlfriends to team up, because they don't quite know each other as well as if you did it in two couples. And I've had a couple of times where the guess has been made in about 30 nanoseconds, and literally all the person's playing with is like a lump of clay, and they've somehow gotten the right answer. And when you look it over and it's just a small ball of clay and someone's guessed that it's an egg timer, you just absolutely cracks me up.
Oh my goodness, I can't imagine trying to make an egg timer out of Play-Doh.
Yeah. And honestly, it's kind of like all the best elements of Pictionary and charades, but like wrapped into like a really fun tactile game. But the way that the clues kind of bring out these like funny interpretive art pieces that people are like, yeah, that's obviously, a TV and a TV remote, and all they've done is do 2 squares and just kept pointing at it, because you're not allowed to say anything. You're not allowed to be like, look at this or point at something. You literally just have to model the Play-Doh. And so I remember playing it once, and the clue ended up being a TV and a TV remote. And literally all they'd done was just make a big rectangle and a small rectangle, and then were just stood there looking at me like I was a complete idiot because I couldn't get it. And I was like, honestly, you need to give me more than this. Yeah. So it's really like an excellent party game, really, really entertaining. So that would be my nomination for a game that makes me laugh the most.
Last episode, we sort of attacked parlour games sort of as a genre, and I
particularly you, I seem to remember.
I think you were the ringleader, weren't you?
All you.
Yeah.
Very well. Okay, I attacked parlour games with a vengeance, and in hindsight, I don't necessarily think that's entirely fair, because I do thoroughly enjoy Rapido, and I'd probably describe it as a parlour game. I think that with a lot of these games, it's a little bit open to some cheating, which goes on. For example, you're not allowed to gesture or make any sort of letters or words, but people do. By people, I mean my wife.
I bet I know what gesture she makes at you as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually think that you wrote a little plaque, which is in my house, saying that she cheats at board games. So that's really been immortalised.
Indeed, yeah. We're still having discussions about that, and I need to probably say quite publicly that I am indeed wrong. So I think, yeah, it lends itself to a little bit of light-hearted cheating, which inevitably gets by everyone sort of very riled up, but in a light-hearted manner. I don't think anyone actually cares that anyone else is cheating, but it does create some lively discussion and debate. But I also what I particularly like about this game is I think you quite rightly outlined there, Simon. It's not necessarily based upon skill. Like the best sculptor won't necessarily win, because with so many of these games, things like this and charades and other things, we've got to try and guess words. It's often about how you approach the particular problem. Where actually, if you try and build an egg timer or a sound timer, then that's very, very difficult. But if you try and do an egg and then a clock, people will get egg timer. Whereas if you try and actually make the actual egg timer, you probably wouldn't get that, because it's very, very difficult to actually sculpt. So yeah, I don't think it necessarily comes down so much to skill in terms of your ability to sculpt, and more comes down to your ability to sort of dissect some of these problems.
I was fully expecting you to completely shred Simon's offering there in order to give your own nomination a better chance. You've been very gentlemanly indeed.
No, this probably is because I haven't really fully understood what we're doing here. I now understand, and I would just like to point out that Rapido is a rubbish game.
Right, I'm going to let Simon get off lightly with that and switch to Sam. Sam, what's your nomination for the funniest game?
So I actually had considered that the best way to win a competition like this would be to, as you just mentioned, to try and undermine the suggestion of the person before. The reason I haven't done that here is that the game I want to suggest is actually very, very similar. So I would like to put forward a game called Crazy Cuts, which is very similar to Rapido in that it's a sort of Pictionary-esque game. But in Crazy Cuts, you cut the shape, whatever it is, out of a piece of paper. Now that's, it's very similar to a charades, it's very similar to a Pictionary, it's very similar to a Rapido or Rapido. But I intend to try and win this round by actually sharing an anecdote of a time that we played this. That is the reason I picked it for this, that it was just so funny. So I played this with some friends of ours, actually some friends of other people on this podcast as well. And we had a game of this for three or four rounds, I think it was. We had, actually, unlike how Simon had it laid out earlier, it was actually a couple and they were playing on the same team. Now, throughout this game, the chap who'd been doing the cutting had been doing a reasonably good job of doing it, and continued to, round after round, cut out quite guessable shapes for everybody, but his partner, who just didn't get them at all. And you could see as the game went on, he was getting slightly more and more irate. The paper was getting chopped more and more viciously, and his face was getting redder and redder and redder. And then it all came to a head when he was tasked with cutting out a broomstick, which he cut out in a way that was unequivocally a broomstick. It could have been nothing but a broomstick. There was nothing else you could have called it. Everyone in the room was looking across. Oh, well, that's a broomstick. And his partner looks at it quite pensively, goes, is it a spade? At which point there was an eruption like nothing I've ever seen. There was just this sort of big bellowing voice going, "A spade? You think this is a spade?" And then this sort of rant ensued of, it was absolute apoplexy just coming out in rage based over a cut out bit of paper looking mildly like a broomstick. And it took me nearly an hour to stop hurting from the laughter that caused. It was a truly hilarious moment. And to be honest, I would say that game I haven't had as many sort of chuckles and laughs as I would do with other games, but for that particular moment, I think I couldn't suggest anything else for being a game that made me laugh anywhere near as much.
I can't work out whether that's hilarious or terrifying.
I mean, that's a fair point. He wasn't yelling at me, so I felt perfectly safe. He was holding scissors, though, I suppose.
Okay. Does anyone want to completely undermine Sam before I give Rob his turn?
No, as Sam said, I feel anything I do to undermine his game would reflect poorly on the clearly better game of Rapido.
Okay, in that case, over to Rob.
All right. So the game that I've chosen to create the most hilarious anecdote is a game we covered last week. It's Fibbage.
It's rubbish.
I'm not sure how I'm going to recover from that.
I know for a fact that Sam loves that game.
It's such an intellectual and well-designed quip there, Sam. I'm not sure how I'm going to respond to that one. This game is predominantly it's a computer game. You need a laptop and a phone, and basically you're given a question, and then you've got to try and think up the correct answer. An answer which you believe could be interpreted as correct, so it sounds correct, despite the fact that you probably don't know the answer to the question because a lot of these questions are quite obscure. It then gives you and all of the rest of the players the opportunity to select what they think is the correct answer from all of your submitted answers and a couple of red herrings they've thrown in there as well. And you get points for selecting the correct answer. So if you get the correct one, then you get points for that. But then if someone selects your incorrect answer, then you get points for them selecting it. So there's incentive there to try and come up with realistic answers. And this game leads to all sorts of hilarity for various reasons. The main one for me is because you can basically name your player whatever you want. So you can basically call whatever you want. And at the end of each round, the game will basically put all of your scores up on the board, which presents an absolutely marvellous opportunity to create rather naughty sentences, which I think, as we've all been pretty clear here, we're all quite immature. So the particular anecdote I would like to tell in my attempt to win this section of the game, which I've just about got my head around in terms of how to play, is a story where I was playing with Claire and Sam and my wife, Meg. And my wife is, she's an absolutely wonderful human being, but I think probably is the most mature of the group. And it gives you the option to place in all your names. And we'd obviously gone with significantly appropriate names. So I'd gone with Massive, Sam went with Flaccid, Claire went with Hairy, and Meg went with Meg. Which meant that the entire game, depending upon who's winning, gets the top spot, and then obviously it goes in progressively descending score order. And the whole game, we were sort of getting sentences that weren't really coming up very well. Sort of Hairy, Meg, yeah, okay, it was all right. It's kind of amusing, but you're not using all of the words there. And it was the last round where we just got Massive, Hairy, Flaccid Meg. That was what cracked me up. It was perfect in every way and was my favourite anecdote from any game.
Oh, that's a wonderful selection of games. I realise I've now been put in a position where I have to decide very quickly on a winner there's not really much thinking time.
Could be gut instinct.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Crafty Cups because it was hilarious. I loved Sam's impression and his reenactment of it, and I was there at the time and I laughed a huge amount. So I can verify that was a time when I also joined in and laughed more. It sounds actually very similar to Rapido. It's just been fortunate that it sounds like Sam got more laughter out of the occasion than Simon has to date. But potentially what he needs to do is introduce the same friends to Rapido, see if it's as funny.
Can I call for a recount?
You're very close there as well, Rob. I was tempted.
Oh, damn. Massive, hairy, flaccid Meg.
We'll try and keep a track of these topics as we go through the weeks and see how the scores line up and see who seems to be making the most compelling cases for their games. But now for a news section, as we ask Simon to give us an update on the news from the gaming world this week.
They recently, via the virtual announcement, announced the Spiel des Jahres, which is a German Game of the Year award, and is like one of the kind of premier awards for board games sort of globally. So there's some kind of really big and well-known games that have previously been winners of this award. So they have two awards. One is like is just the Game of the Year, and then they have a second category which is called the German translation, and I love this, is the Connoisseurs Game of the Year, which I absolutely love. So the game that won the overall Game of the Year this year was a game called Pictures. So it's actually really interesting that we've been talking about Rapido and Crazy Cuts, because it feels like this game would fit perfectly alongside those. So Pictures is a quick playing sort of family game with very simple rules. Basically, you get a image, which is on a secret bit of card. Each person gets one. And then you also get one set of very specific components from the box. So you can either be given a set of shoelaces, some coloured cubes, some card, some sticks and stones, or some like Lego style building blocks. And what you have to do is then take the image from your secret card and try and build it, create it, put it together using just that component that you've been allocated. And then other players have to guess from a mixture of all of the secret cards that are then revealed which one you've tried to recreate. And you basically get points for people guessing correctly your kind of piece of artwork, and you also guessing the correct piece of artwork from other people. And then at the end of that, the person with the most points wins. And I think it's kind of done in a round, so that if you had the shoelaces for the last round, then you'll get the coloured cubes for the next round and things like that. So I wondered, having just talked about Rapido and Crazy Cuts, what you guys kind of make of that.
What do you think, Rob, as our most critical parlour game player?
I think probably the main risk of a parlour game is that it gets played too much. You know, you only ever own one or two of them, and they come out every single time you've got friends around. And actually, potentially, there is a lot of scope here to sort of try new and varied things. And I think there's a real appeal to a game that you can get finished in 20 minutes, even less sometimes. And, you know, provided it's got good replayability and provided it creates some good memories, then I think you're onto a total winner.
Out of interest, Simon, what won the Connoisseurs Game of the Year?
So the Connoisseurs Game of the Year is probably closer to the kind of games that I would say we are all more familiar with playing. They seem to be kind of slightly more complicated, slightly longer in playtime, etc. And the game that won it, I think Rob maybe will like this one a little more, is called The Crew, The Quest for Planet 9. And it's a cooperative trick-taking game, which I'd never heard the phrase trick-taking before I did my research into this, in which the players are astronauts on an adventure in space trying to reach the 9th planet. And as you sort of go through that journey, there's kind of 50 different scenarios or challenges that pop up along your quest to make it to the end of the game. And essentially what it works is each player has their own hand of cards which represent their own role on the ship, like engineering or weapons or whatever. And you have to kind of communicate and work together to play your cards in the correct order to pass through each of the challenges. And each mission that you complete it then gets sort of exponentially more difficult. So once you get to that 49th or 50th mission, it's, you know, extremely challenging, and you need to play the cards in exactly the right order, using the kind of limited methods of communication the game allows you to use. So it definitely sounds like something I think, minus Sam, because it's cooperative, this group would enjoy.
Does it have a board, or is it a card game?
No, it's all just played through cards and laying cards from your own hand into like a central area, as far as I can tell.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
So those are the two winners. Interestingly, I was looking up the Spiel des Jahres, kind of the impact of it, and it basically said if you're a winner if you win one of their awards, on average the winning games sell between 300 and 500,000 copies.
Wow.
So These are, yeah, it's a big deal, and it's one of the reasons that the sort of German board game market is so important and so prevalent further afield than just Europe and just Germany.
Okay, well, thank you for your news update, Simon. Moving on, we will look at our first game review for this week, which is the Lord of the Rings adventure card game, which me and Simon have been playing. So the Lord of the Rings adventure card game was brought out in 2011 by Fantasy Flight Games, the same people that bought you Twilight Imperium and the Arkham Horror card game and the Marvel Champions card game.
Many others.
And many others. So the way that it works is you get a deck of cards. So it's a deck building game, so you can build your own deck of cards, which contains some heroes and some action cards, or effect cards is probably a better way of describing it. And you go through various quests using your heroes and your action cards to defeat various enemies. The enemies in this case are, they're all relevant to the quest, but they are effectively...
orcs or,
beings that are beholden, or orcs or spiders or wolves or things that are beholden to Sauron. When you play this, the person you play against is Sauron controlling his own deck of cards. So, we played this for the last week or so. It's quite good fun, I would say. I think it's there's something quite nice about the Middle-earth theme to a card game. I think it actually plays very well. I think the mechanics have been quite well thought out. I would say that it doesn't grab me in the way I was expecting this game to. I'm very pro Tolkien. I like my Lord of the Rings. I've read the books, I've watched the films and the such like, and I'm a big fan. And I didn't find that the game grabbed me in the way that I thought it would.
I do think it's a shame, because I think the Lord of the Rings obviously is a very well-loved and iconic kind of lore and things that you could pull from. This is clearly, obviously a licensed product, which means that it's been, created with the blessing of the people that hold the rights and things to Lord of the Rings. And I do feel that I don't think it really does it justice in the same way. I think there's a lot of kind of voice acted in between the missions sort of story and things like that, but it's quite silly and it's quite badly voice acted and things like that, which for something that I think most people would say in kind of media, print and in the movies, they've clearly taken a lot of care and time about. To have something like this does feel a little bit cheap.
To add some context to what Simon's saying there, we've been playing the online version of this. It does exist in physical and online forms. The online version is actually very nicely put together. It's a very good interface. It works. It's fairly engaging. It's very intuitive. I can't say, I must say, sorry, I haven't played the physical version of this game. I can't imagine it will be hugely different. It seems that the online game is very much an interface where you move cards around, so I can't imagine it will be much different to play it on a table. And I think I do agree with you, Simon. I think that there is an element of they just slightly missed an opportunity. Co-op deck building board games is sort of a bit of a holy grail in the deck builder sort of genre. There aren't many that do it, and I don't think there are any that do it well. And I think that the way that the mechanics in this game mean that it actually does work really well. I think that the combination of two people playing together against one enemy, the way that the enemy scales to deal with the two people that it's fighting against, I think it works really well. And yet somehow, and I can't quite put my finger on how, the game just doesn't grab me. I don't want to. I never finished it and thought, or finished one quest. You do quests you do like 4 missions, 5 missions make up a quest. I've never finished a quest and thought, I really want to do another one. And the weird thing about that is the quests only take sort of between 30 and 45 minutes, so it's very feasible to just think, maybe I'll just do a second. And it just doesn't grab me and make me want to do that. I think that for this game to work, I think you've got to have a very imaginative mind. I think you've got to be able to really immerse yourself in a story that isn't that apparent. They make a good effort actually of giving you good context for the quest you're going into, so you understand the situation you're in, and you do the quest in 5 different missions, so it's all been quite well staged. And I think if you're the sort of person that can just immerse yourself in what you've been thinking about and sort of create this whole world in your mind that you're playing a card game in, then this game could be perfect. It could be exactly what you want. And if you've got some friends, then playing that as a cooperative thing would be great, and I think you'd really love it. I don't think I've got the right mind for that. I think I need theme and artistry and that sort of stuff really to beat me over the head, or I just don't get it, which I think is probably why I buy into sort of big, wider grand strategy games a little bit more, because the theme is sort of all-encompassing of everything that you've got to think about.
One of the big draws, I think, for a lot of these card building games is the artwork on the cards. What's that like? Is it quite a beautiful game, is it? Or
it's got this kind of it's like a very painted portrait-esque kind of look. It's I tell you one thing that it made me realise is that you're so used to seeing the iconography and the imagery and the designs from the movies of Lord of the Rings, that when you see, let's say, Aragorn drawn on a card and he doesn't look anything like Viggo Mortensen, it just is a little bit like, oh yes, this isn't the movie, the game, this is the books, the game. Yeah. And the Lord of the Rings is one of those things that has a fantastic wealth of artwork from fans and things like that over the years. I'm not convinced that anything that in here would really set the world on fire. So there's a couple of things that I'd like to talk about this game that I think are quite positive. I think whenever you talk about this kind of deck building game, you can't really not talk about Hearthstone, which is a very similar sort of style of game, which is immensely popular. And Rob, I believe you've played quite a lot of Hearthstone.
Probably not as much as a lot of people, but yeah, I've dabbled.
And what I like that this game does differently, and it's clearly like a conscious decision, is instead of just having your deck of cards and monsters and things like that, the way that it uses the hero characters from the Lord of the Rings as almost the kind of linchpin for your deck. So you will put those out onto the field. They have, a lot more health and a lot more kind of power and attack than the kind of supporting characters, and they're actually the bits that are tied to whether you win or lose. So if you lose your heroes, then you'll lose the scenario. And actually, even if you just lose one hero, the value of losing that really empowers the Sauron player or the Sauron side. So it's quite negative to lose any of them, and if you lose all of them, then you've lost the scenario.
So whereas in Hearthstone, sort of the way that you would win would be by directly attacking the other player. In this, you attack heroes, and presumably if you lose a certain number of heroes, you lose the game.
Correct, yeah. So the enemy side will also potentially have other hero, like evil heroes, if you like. Not necessarily. So that kind of leads me on to another thing that I think it does quite differently compared to Hearthstone, is that as you're playing through these campaigns, it's not just Sam and I versus Sauron, and if we beat Sauron, we can progress to the next level. There'll actually be particular things on the field which aren't enemy monsters, but are almost like checks that you need to complete. So, for example, there was one where we wanted to get, like, the objective of the field that we were playing was to get away from the spiders and to cross over a river, and you could complete the scenario in two ways. You could kill all of the spiders, or you could spend some of your turns, instead of attacking them, attacking another sort of, it looks like a kind of gateway on the field, and that has a certain set of health, and if you defeat that gateway, it would cause a tree to fall over the river so that you can run across the tree and not fall into the river, and then that would allow you to travel to the next scenario. So
this sounds really interesting. Like the way you described this, it sounds like quite a good game.
It's definitely interesting in comparison, because I was very much coming into this game expecting it to be a Lord of the Rings clone of Hearthstone. So it was quite interesting to see how they avoided becoming that, and how they tried to sort of change up some of the mechanics for this campaign. I think the other thing that I really liked about it is the fact that you have these hero characters out on the field very often, as well as having like healing spells and supporting allies like Elven Archer and Ilian Scout or something like that, which are obviously not named heroes.
Third elf from the left, yeah, I'm with you.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. You could also get like equipment. So in one of the examples, I had Bilbo's sword Sting, and you could play that card and then equip it to one of either your heroes or to any of the sort of ally characters that you'd placed on the board. And what that would do...
Hang on a sec. Aragorn could go round wielding Sting.
Oh, yes.
But it'd be so small for him.
But it does give him +2 to spiders and orcs, so...
Crikey.
Yeah. But I actually,
Not sure how I feel
each
about
of the
that.
sort of heroes had, like a weapon enhancement card that you could equip to them, a shield enhancement card that would mean they would take less damage, and then also like another positive multiplier that you could play on them.
Yeah, one of the things I think you really can tell with this game is that Fantasy Flight have done this before. As you said, I think that the mechanics of this game work really well. They have really thought it through. It does function very well, and it does allow you to really think about the way you are going to build your deck. It really is a deck building game by every definition. That you really set yourself up for quests based around the heroes you pick and the cards that go along with it, and the game makes it quite obvious as you play it what you should be doing to select this deck, to build this deck, and what should go into it. The heroes play off each other. If some heroes are in combination with other heroes, they get certain bonuses, which you can think about when you're trying to build it. And obviously the cards you get to go with the heroes to support them obviously have different modifiers to go with it. So I think they have really thought it through very well. And it just overall didn't really gel with me. And I think that might be more a preference for myself than it is actually a criticism of the game as such.
Is that because you don't like games as a rule that don't allow you to beat your opponent?
No. I think it's more because I just found myself not buying into the premise. I found I was playing a card game, and I didn't really buy into the whole Lord of the Rings aspect, which I found was a bit of a disappointment because I'm quite a big fan of the...
I was going to say, I think we were both quite excited by that element of it, and actually I think Sam bounced off a lot harder than I did in terms of he was pinning a lot, I think, on that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sam.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I was sold into this because of the Lord of the Rings, not because of the deck building aspect. That was something I was interested in. But
take Lord of the Rings out, and it's a very good game.
Interesting question.
I'd almost agree with you on that. I think there's probably a couple of little changes here and there, but I think with different theming, if I'd have gone into it without sort of pinning my hopes on a theme and just gone into it to as a card game, yeah, I think as a deck building game, it's been really well thought through, and I think it's very functional.
So basically, you like the theme too much, and you're a bit protective of it, and because of that, it spoils the game.
Maybe a little bit. I've always wanted there to be a game because the theme games on the whole tend to be a bit rubbish because they tend to just be a here is a normal game and we've just put a new theme on it. Like we
paint
talked
job,
about the Harry Potter Trivial Pursuit recently, and I really like the idea of there being a themed game at some point where it really benefits you to be a fan of the theme. Because I've never seen that apart from Theme Trivial Pursuit where there's like a quiz element to it. But I'd be really intrigued for someone to build a game where, so it's about Lord of the Rings, for example, where having a good knowledge of Lord of the Rings is actually beneficial.
Sam, there is one massive downfall to that, which is that if you need to have read the Silmarillion before you can play this game, no one will play the game.
I could play it on my own.
Yeah, you'll be sat there playing it by yourself, being like, if you haven't read the Silmarillion, you're not a real Lord of the Rings fan.
But that's what I do on a Friday anyway. We should probably talk money a little bit on this game because one of the big downsides of deck building games, in my mind, is the cost of them. I think they should be something which is sort of cheap and affordable in the same way you just buy Pokemon cards. You just go to a shop and you spend 50p and you get 6 cards in a packet.
Oh, if only it was that cheap.
I thought that's what it was, and having looked into deck builders a bit more over the last few years, that really isn't what they are. They're quite expensive. So for this game, the core set is currently £33.93p on Amazon. For just the core set without the expansion, the additional packs on top of that are about £20 each, give or take 50p or so, which I think is quite a lot. And I wondered if this was just something for this game. I've looked at the Arkham Horror.
That's about the same for Arkham Horror, yeah.
Broadly the same, yeah. And it seems to be that is the deck building, or probably the best way of putting it is that is the premium deck building game price, which I think is quite a lot for what a deck building game is. But as we discussed, you do get a game which has been that clearly people have put a lot of hours into designing. So I suppose there's a win some, lose some. On Steam currently for the electronic version without any of the additions is £15.49, so £15.50.
The important question is though, would you prefer to have £15 worth of beer?
Yeah, so if you assume that 50, we'll call that, let's say we're in an expensive pub, we'll call that 3 pints.
Yeah.
I think for the Steam version, for me, I think I'd rather have the 3 pints. I don't know about you, Simon. I'm a bit on the fence about it though, but I think I would probably have the beer.
I think I would too. I think that I kind of agree with what Claire said in that actually in this case I feel like the theme actually works against it for me, and that I really wanted to like it, and I just, because I didn't, it was almost doubly disappointing. But that's not to say that it's a bad game or it's a bad deck builder, because I think it does have some interesting twists to what is quite a familiar format if you're into those types of games.
So there we have it, Lord of the Rings adventure card game. If you're into Harry Potter, you might not mind it. Okay, so we will move on to another new topic for us this week, which is the What Have We Been Playing segment, where Rob is going to sort of give us a bit of a lowdown on what we've been playing for ourselves in the last couple of weeks, as opposed to what we've been playing for the podcast.
Yeah, so we've it's been quite an exciting week this week, insofar that it was my birthday, and what that basically means is that we've had an influx of games come into the sort of the realm of things that we can play. Inevitably, we haven't managed to even make a dent in those in just a week, but one game that I think's really stood out from the crowd has been Star Realms, which was developed by White Wizard Games. It's actually, funnily enough, leading quite nicely on from the previous topic, is a deck building game. So it started in 2013 as a Kickstarter, and sort of similar to sort of most deck building games, that the goal is to destroy your opponent or opponents through purchasing cards using trade points, and then by purchasing more powerful cards, you get more sort of attack value, and then that makes you sort of more effective at attack.
Is it a physical game, Rob, or a computer game?
It is both. So yeah, I've got the card game version, which is a very reasonable price, I'm told. However, of course, it was a present, so I'm not allowed to look it up. But I'm sure someone else could do it for me, and I'll stick my fingers in my ears and go la while you read it out. So yeah, it is both. There is also a mobile app as well. It is a sci-fi game, which fits in very nicely with sort of my particular interest, and I think it is absolutely beautiful. The artwork is excellent and doesn't fall into the same pitfalls as the Lord of the Rings game that we were just talking about, insofar as it is standalone. So all of the lore is separate, all of the narrative is separate as well. I thought that the rules were really easy to get my head around. I've been playing it a little bit with Simon this week, and I thought they're pretty easy to pick up. And then once you're familiar with the gameplay, which I think probably takes one playthrough maybe, the gameplay is very quick. It's sort of very snappy, albeit that was put to the test when playing with Simon.
That is not true.
So yeah, you know, I so far I've really enjoyed it. It's also as well ticked yet another box, insofar as not only have I been playing it with Simon, but I've also been playing it with my wife as well, Meg, who sort of is quite intimidated by large, really in-depth games. She's gotten on very well with it, and actually, I'm ashamed to admit, but I know I'd get it in the ear if I didn't state so on the podcast. She's actually winning, which is very annoying.
I could tell this game was a winner because Meg asked if I could play it with her when you were busy playing something else. And I feel like that is the kindest endorsement we can almost give a game.
I totally agree, and it's also created quite a nice. Like she'll text me at the end of work, for example, and say, "Get the game set up" if I'm working from home and she's at work. And then, you know, for the entire journey back, we're sort of trash talking each other, ready to actually play the game. So, you know, I think probably she's engaged with this more than probably any other game that we've actually reviewed, which again, I think is very, very high praise.
Oh, excellent. Okay, then we'll move on.
Yeah, this sounds
we
good.
will check in with Rob again in 2 weeks' time and find out what people have been playing for the last for the fortnight coming. So we will move on to our second review of this podcast, which has been done by Claire and Rob, and is about a genre as opposed to a particular game in this case. So it's about tower defense games. So Claire, do you want to give us your thoughts on tower defense games?
Yeah, I'll start off by explaining what tower defense games are for anyone that hasn't yet had the pleasure. Tower defense games are a genre of games where you are protecting an item, usually by setting up some sort of turrets or weapons. But the range of themes within the category can be so varied that you can't be any more specific than that. So we've been defending things like cake and castles, and the things that we've been using to do it have varied from laser beams to cabbages, which is fantastic. We started off by reviewing Antbuster, which is something that Rob and I have really fond memories of, because when we were doing our A-levels, Antbuster wasted significant proportions of the time we were supposed to be spending revising. And in this game, you are on a picnic and you have a cake with 8 slices in it. And there are ants constantly coming from a nearby anthill trying to steal your cake. So one ant has the capacity to carry 1 slice of cake. And when all 8 slices are gone and have been carried back to the anthill, that's when the game ends for you. However, you can defend yourself by building gun turrets, and there's lots of different types of gun turrets you can build and lots of different upgrades, so you can get quite strategic over it. You can have quick fire, but not very damaging, or scatter gun approach, or laser beams, or snipers, or rocket launchers. There's a huge variety of weaponry that you can use to protect your cake. Rob, do you want to kick off and say what you thought of it?
Yeah, definitely. So Antbuster, as Claire's already said, probably in terms of a game, is nothing particularly to sort of write home about. You know, it still runs on Flash Player, which, to be honest with you, when we tried to play it again this time, you know, I had to enable various security settings in my browser, which meant that probably all of my personal details were stolen. But it was totally worth it to play it again, because I've got extremely fond memories of this. The gameplay itself is, you know, it's basic, but it does a job. It is infinite, as I think sort of a lot of the best tower defense games are, in my opinion. So basically, the ants will never stop coming. They will eventually overwhelm your defenses, but it comes down to basically what score you get. So you're always aiming to get the highest score. And this, I think, was what made it so addictive for me, was that I would set a new high score, having, you know, spent most of the morning when I should have been revising, doing so, and then almost feel a little bit bad to send it to Claire, because I know that if I did, she would then have to spend the entire afternoon where she should be revising, having to beat my score. Now, needless to say, I didn't do tremendously well at my A-level. Claire did significantly better than I did, so I did also walk away with the high score in the end, though, so I think I was the ultimate winner.
Yeah, I seem to remember that you very selflessly didn't tell me when you made the high score, just so as to help me in the end put less time into trying to beat you.
Yeah. Now, so because we have sort of discussed this a little bit, so I know that you found the same thing, but I realised now that the game goes on a heck of a lot longer than I ever remember it going on.
Would you like me to read you my notes on the matter, which tragically document my mental demise?
Oh, please do.
So, as we were playing this, I had time to write notes, which I think tells you a little bit about the pace of the game. And they run as thus. It takes longer to warm up than I remember. My attention span is shorter than I remember. It may be that the game is too slow. Time is going slowly. This makes me want to eat Nutella with a spoon.
Is there no? I assume there's no fast forward option to sort of speed up.
There is not.
No, and it could really benefit from that.
It must, yeah, it really, really could do.
The second game that we looked at is Plants vs. Zombies. And this is exactly what it says on the tin. You are trying to defend your house and zombies are approaching it. Unlike the ants, they always walk in a straight line, so you're trying to defend effectively 5 lanes against zombies. You can plant your own plants as a line of fence, and in nearly all cases, the plant will fire into the lane that it's in, so you can see what's going to happen. The plants vary fantastically, so you can get cabbage hurlers. I really like the Venus flytraps that ate the zombies. You can get squashes which leap up into the air and squash the zombies. And you need sunflowers to charge and get you little sunlight tokens, because that's effectively the currency that lets you buy more things. And because of that, the game was fast paced. So you've really got to keep an eye on the zombies, what they're doing. If they get too close to your flowers, they will eat them. So whereas the ants can interact with your laser turret gun cannons in Antbuster, the zombies can really harm your defences. And that was a really interesting dynamic because some things were quite resistant to being eaten. In fact, you can plant some things like walnuts, which just their purpose is to get eaten so that you can shoot zombies while they are distracted by your walnuts. But then other things, like your Venus flytraps, are really vulnerable because while they're digesting one zombie, they're completely harmless to the next zombie, and they themselves can get eaten by the zombies. And the creators of this game have clearly had a lot of fun doing it because they've got zombies travelling by balloons, they've got granny zombies, they've got American football zombies, they've got zombies that have acquired traffic cones and put them on their heads. As you go through the game, the variety becomes more and more, and that makes it really fun to play because you have to learn how to defeat each zombie. The terrain changes as well. You've got day and night, and then at the end you even end up fighting them on the roof, at which point you need plants that can fire things high in the air to get the right angle on them. So your pea shooters that were great previously are now no good, and you must use corn in the cob that can be hurled through the air and get your zombies covered in butter. And so the imagination of this game was really pleasing, and the speed of the game I think was just right. You found that you won the majority of them, but you did have to replay it occasionally when you made the wrong call and the wrong decisions. And you can probably tell with the level of enthusiasm that I'm talking about this game with that I absolutely loved it, and I quickly found myself addicted to it. So much so that I actually downloaded it on Tuesday and then finished it on Saturday, and I've wasted a huge proportion of this week on this game, and I don't even regret it.
I think as a wise person once said, Claire, if it's time spent enjoying something, it's not time wasted.
I actually had an incident earlier this week where I ended up going to A&E, and I think I was probably the most content person in that waiting room because I had Plants vs Zombies on my phone.
Why am I hearing that you went to A&E in the middle of our podcast? I feel like that's something friends should tell each other.
I did turn out all right.
Well, that's good.
Rob, did you play Plants vs Zombies as well?
Yeah, I did, yeah. And have done previously as well. It is a really good game. I think it's stark contrast. I think a lot of the downfall for Antbuster, Plants vs Zombies, directly tackles. So the game is really engaging from start to finish. There's none of this sort of I'm going to build my defences and then just sort of let them tick over for a little bit, which I think can be a real downside for a lot of tower defence games, is that you set up a really good defence and then you get this sort of like middle chunk where you don't really need to do much in order for them to sort of continue accruing money, which you can then spend. I think Plants vs Zombies does a really good job of making sure that you do need to be really attentive to your defences and make sure that they are being constantly sort of adapted and changed to make sure that they are effectively dealing with the different types of zombies. I think the other real attraction, which I think Claire's already perfectly outlined, is that it's nicely humorous. It's nice that the game doesn't take itself seriously. I mean, admittedly, Antbuster doesn't take itself seriously either, but this game in particular just doesn't take itself seriously.
It's got a great sense of humour, this game.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, it does, yeah. So yeah. I played the first Plants vs Zombies and very much enjoyed it. And then I moved on to Plants vs Zombies 2, which I actually think is better than the original, but I suppose that's
I wholeheartedly disagree.
I actually disagree with you there.
I think most people preferred the first. I think it's me and very few others that prefer the sequel. But I do think that the pair of them are fantastic. So I think I've completed the first Plants vs Zombies many years ago, and since then I have completed Plants vs Zombies 2, forgotten about it, thought about it again when somebody jogged my memory and thought, I'll re-download that, and then completed the whole of the second one again. I find it's wildly addictive for reasons that I can't put my finger on. There's just something about seeing a Pak Choi punch a zombie in the head that it's just endlessly funny. One of the really big draws for all of the tower defense games that we're going to talk about, bar potentially Antbuster, is that they're drop-in, drop-out games. So you don't need to have a period of time where you're not going to be interrupted in order to play them. So Plants vs Zombies you can get on your phone or on a tablet, and it's certainly the next tower defense game we're going to talk about is available on mobile as well. And you can pause it mid sort of mission, mid scenario, mid level, and I think they're fantastic games if you want an element of strategy
but you don't have all that much time to dedicate to gaming. And that for me is why they're so addictive, because I've got a spare 2 minutes. I'll drop in and play 2 minutes of Plants vs Zombies. They're a good attention grabber, but don't take too much of your time.
Yeah, although following up on that, although they don't need to take up too much of your time, I've got to admit that I came home last night and it was quite late and it was dinner time. I was about 9:00, and instead of making dinner, I spent 2 hours playing Plants vs Zombies and eventually had dinner at 11. It will take up a lot of your time.
That potentially, I think, is a pretty good endorsement of a game, isn't it? Like, if you choose not to eat because you're enjoying yourself so much, that's either that or it's diagnosable. Either one.
I have a question for the podcast before we move on from Plants vs Zombies. Which is your favourite zombie, Claire?
Maybe it would be better if I tell you the one that infuriated me the most, because there's some that
that's fine.
drop down from the ceiling on a bungee and they steal your plants. So your cleverly laid down defences are then suddenly removed. And I became very strategic about my defences and a little bit OCD about exactly how I like to set them up so that they were complementary.
Rob, what's your favourite zombie?
Again, I can tell you which is my most infuriating, which is the ones with jetpacks that jump behind your lines. Those are very annoying.
Sam, what would you say from memory, what's your favourite one?
Oh, the pole vault.
The pole vault is good.
Oh.
Yeah. I really like the pole vault guy. It's not because of any of the abilities he has. It's just because of the way that he runs without really going any faster. He's just got this hilarious motion they've got of this massive spear over his shoulder that he's going to use as a pole vault, and just sort of loads of movement but very little speed.
He's so infuriating as well. It makes me dig up my back lines because he gets over your initial defences, and I've got my vulnerable plants at the back that are generating energy and things for me. And then I've got to dig them up and replace them with something a bit more vicious.
You just want to plant a potato mine in front of all of your walnuts, so it'll jump over whatever the first thing is. So it'll jump over the mine won't go off, but then it's still trapped by the walnut, and you can just shoot it with whatever you're shooting it with. That's the technique to deal with the pole vaulters. Mine in front of walnut.
My favourite, without a shadow of the doubt, are the thriller zombies, which is a to describe it is a zombie that dances onto the screen in whichever lane it's in,
complete with spotlight.
Yeah, complete with dancing disco spotlight in what I would say in a suspiciously copyrighted thing looks like the red leather jacket from the Thriller video, and then proceeds to summon a load of backup dancing zombies which look like Disco Stew from The Simpsons if he was a zombie. Just brilliant.
So I'm going to move us on to the third tower defence game that we tried, which was Infinitoad.
Has it got toads in it?
Unfortunately not.
That's a shame.
It is, yeah. Already a black mark against its name.
I can't think of a single toad-themed game, and that's a disappointing state for the world to be in. We need more toady games.
Mutant Ninja Turtles? Oh, I guess they're not toads, actually. They're turtles, yeah.
It's not a toad.
They both begin with T, though, mate. Well done.
But the Wind in the Willows board game.
Is that a thing?
There's no way there's not a Wind in the Willows board game.
Oh my god, there actually is a Wind in the Willows board game.
No.
Of course there is.
Amazing.
Excellent.
Right, I'm going to take it back to Infinitoad. So Rob and I were supposed to be reviewing Infinitoad 2, but because I couldn't find that on the store for whatever reason, I ended up reviewing Infinitoad 1, which I can only assume is a more basic version. So this is an extremely simple version. It felt almost reminiscent of Space Invaders to me. So I was defending a castle, and that castle had a long windy path, and to that path were coming little green dots. They weren't animated in any more complex way than that. And as someone that had been playing Plants vs. Zombie heavily, that seemed like quite a boring feature. But anyway, there are many little platforms next to this path where you can build your gun turrets. I had 3 types of gun turrets available to me to build, which might be because I hadn't invested the game, and it might be because I was on level 1. When I first played it, I managed to withstand 3 waves of little green dots, and then I worked out how to build the gun turrets a bit faster and better and upgrade them, and I found I was able to withstand many more waves. In order to get through level 1, you had to withstand 50 waves, and I never managed more than 33. So I've got to admit that I was a complete fail at testing this game, because I can only tell you what level 1 was like.
How many levels are there? Do we know?
There are lots and lots and lots. Yeah, I think we are talking about slightly different games here, but the premise is very much the same. The graphics are not particularly hardcore, as Claire quite rightly pointed out. It's a very, very simple-looking game. And, I think you can draw plus points and negative points from that. It's not particularly sort of visually confusing. It's very straightforward and remains straightforward throughout. So it becomes far more about strategy. It's not as humorous, there are no jokes within this game. It's sort of just basic strategy. How am I going to defend myself against these waves? The main draw for me of this game was the depth of it. There's a research tree which is just enormous, absolutely huge, probably bigger than any other game I've ever played, where you can upgrade the power of each unit or the price of each unit, that sort of thing, in many, many different ways. And actually, I did have a look. Once you get far enough into this tech tree, it actually gives you access to the developer tools, so you can sort of mod the game, which I just think is crazy deep.
I did not get anywhere near that kind of revelation. Frankly, I could have done with the tutorial, a better tutorial than the one that was provided.
The advantage with Infinitode is that you will never complete it. I think if you unlock all of the tech tree, you've probably lost years of your life. It is a game which you can get sort of as deep into as you would like to.
Okay, so a clear win for Plants vs Zombies there. I don't think anyone would argue with that. I think it's an excellent game. A quick comment from you both on tower defence as a genre as opposed to individual games?
Yeah, very satisfying. The thing is, most games require someone to play with, whereas tower defence game is probably one of the most entertaining single-player games.
Yeah, great. I think excellent game to drop into when you've got a spare 2 minutes. You're waiting for a train, you're in a clothes store that you don't want to be in, anything like that. Really, really good game just to sort of whip out of your pocket and play.
And I cannot recommend highly enough that everyone who hears this downloads Plants vs Zombies, even if you've already done it before, because as Sam has demonstrated on this podcast already, it's got great replayability, and if you haven't played it for a few years, it's still good to come back to.
I'm looking at the screenshots now on Steam, and I just want to play it again. It's just so delightful to look at.
Okay, so moving on from our reviews, we can't really do a is it worth the price in beer on these on the basis that they're all free. So I suppose we could say that they're definitely worth their price in beer because you could have both. Okay, so just before we finish this week, we have a little bit of time for Claire to have a delve into our electronic post box. What's been filling up our inbox this week, Claire?
So, the question that I've pulled out of our post box for this week is from Antonia in London. So her comment on our previous show was that we really slated a lot of her favourite games like Cranium and Dobble and Trivial Pursuit in one fell hit by ruling out parlour games. And so her conclusion was that we tend to prefer strategy games and indeed may only give favourable reviews of strategy games. So I'd like to put this to Rob and ask you what games that are not strategy games that you rate highly, if any.
I've got three. Firstly, I'd recommend that you have a look at Spyfall. This was made by the developers Hobby World, I think. I could be totally wrong, but I believe it's Hobby World. And it is a really fun, fast-paced game where you've got to try and identify the spy in amongst the group of people playing. The game works basically by... You've got a deck of cards, and there are 20, 30 decks, something like that. And there's about 8 cards in each deck. One of those cards will be the spy card, and the rest will all have a location on it. You hand them out privately to each person who's playing. And what that will mean basically is that 7 people who are playing all know exactly where they're supposed to be because the location is the same on each card. And you've got one person in the room who has no idea where they're supposed to be. The job of the spy is to identify what that location is. And the job of all the people in the room is to try and make sure that location isn't obvious to the spy. The risk being, of course, that if you're too ambiguous when people ask you these, because the gameplay basically is people asking each other questions, which is supposed to either sort of make the spy obvious, so you ask really sort of poignant questions about specifics about the location they're in. Of course, the spy doesn't know, so they have to be quite ambiguous with their answer.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I've got an excellent example. So we were on the space station. So 7 people in the room knew that we were on the International Space Station. The spy did not. Questions went along the lines of, I asked the person who I wasn't aware was the spy, but was in fact the spy, can you tell us how you got here today, please? And the spy sort of thought about it for a moment and said, yes, I can tell you how I got here. I got here via Segway. And the issue with that, of course, is that I now know unequivocally that you are the spy, because you cannot possibly get to the International Space Station on a Segway. But if I asked someone who wasn't the spy, oh, can you tell me how you got here? And they said, oh, yes, I got here by rocket ship. Then suddenly the spy knows, okay, well, the International Space Station is very specific. There's only one location which it can be, because you can only get to the ISS via rocket ship. So the way the answer questions has got to be really careful, because if you're too ambiguous and you say, oh, I got here in the usual way, then you're not being specific enough and you sound like the spy. But if you're too specific, then the spy knows exactly where you are and they win. So it's a really, really fun game. It leads to much hilarity. Really, really recommend you take a look at that one. Another one you might want to look at, well, we've mentioned it a couple of times already. I really recommend you have a look at Fibbage. Really, really fun Jackbox game. Yeah, I've already explained that one earlier on, so I won't go back into it. And the third is a new game to me. It's not one I've come across before. It was bought for me for my birthday by my lovely wife, and is Codenames. And this particular game it requires a great deal of thinking, which is not something I'm particularly good at, but there we are. Basically, you've got a grid of words, and you've got to try and link those words together using one clue.
I can give a good example of this, because I once played a game where it really hung in the balance. Someone could win the game if they could link the words jet and unicorn. And this is obviously very difficult 2 words to link. And they were trying to get me to guess what they were from the words available. And the clue that they gave me, the 1-word clue, was Pegasus. And that was quite difficult, because Pegasus didn't match any of the words on the board, including unicorn and jet. Ooh. But I figured that the person giving the clue, I went out and I took a risk, because I guessed that she might think that Pegasus was a unicorn, and Pegasus did fly and jet planes fly, and so I did get it, and the game was won, which was absolutely fantastic, and it made me laugh a lot.
To give you a bit of context on the risk of doing that, so Codenames, there's a selection of clues, or a collection of answers, laid out in front of you. I think it's like a 5x5 grid, so there's probably 25 options. Some will be for your team to get, some will be for your opponent's team to get, some will be neutral, and therefore it doesn't matter if anyone gets them. And one will be like an apocalypse card, where if you get that, it's an instant lose. So when you're giving the clues out, you want to make sure that the clue that you give not only makes people pick the words that you need them to pick, but also doesn't lead them to mistakenly pick one which belongs to your opponent, or will lead to you losing the game. So it's quite tricky in that sense, trying to work out exactly what the right clues are.
And there's something immensely frustrating about seeing someone sort of mention a word which you want them to pick, but then almost second guessing themselves and choosing a different word which you desperately don't want them to pick. But of course you're not allowed to give any other clues than just the one clue, so you just have to watch them talk themselves into getting the wrong card,
which is almost as frustrating as when you look at the words that you need to give out clues for, and you instantly get hit with a spark of inspiration and think, oh, I can get all 5 in one now, this is perfect, I've got the perfect clue. And you look up at the person you're giving the clue to and think, oh, I've got the perfect clue for anybody but you.
That is so
You
true.
will not get this clue, but it's brilliant.
Yeah, anyone who's read the 3rd chapter of Silmarillion will know exactly what this is. But
I think that's an excellent selection of non-strategy games there, Rob.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Tiny Table Talks. Please do get in touch via email at thetinytables@gmail.com, or tweet us at tinytablepod and let us know your questions about all things games. We will endeavour to respond to all of them and feature as many as we can on the podcast. Join us in a fortnight for a review of a World War II action game, our thoughts on one of the most revered classic board games around, and as always, a plethora of comments about Rob's oh-so-tiny table.